And I waited, not for them, but for myself, for the moment I would know absolutely and finally what to do next, because they had crossed a line. Yes, but I was no longer standing on it. I had moved. I had stepped off the path they laid, and onto one I was drawing for myself, each footstep quiet, certain, unapologetically mine. It didn't happen right away. At first, I don't think they even noticed I was gone, physically. Yes, they saw that the cottage had been emptied, that the porch was bare, the windows dark. They drove by, I imagine, maybe once, maybe twice. They probably called my number out of habit, heard the line disconnected, and furrowed their brows. But beyond the surface disruption, I don't think they felt it. Not then, not. Yet my leaving wasn't an act of rebellion. It was an act of clarity. I didn't slam doors or leave dramatic notes. I just made myself unavailable, quietly. Fully, the cottage sold within weeks. I didn't tell them where I went, and they didn't ask with any real urgency. Maybe they assumed I'd moved into a friend's house, or with a relative they never cared to meet. Maybe they thought I'd gone on some retreat for aging women who bake bread and tend to grief. But what I had truly done, was remove the net they didn't know they were walking on. They had grown used to me being there, like a humming refrigerator, a light left on, a silent giver. They didn't always acknowledge it, but it was there, I was there. In every holiday meal that ran smoother because I arrived early to help. In every birthday card that showed up on time. In every weeknight emergency where the kids needed last-minute care or someone had to wait for a delivery. In the 1,000 little ways their lives were quietly stabilized by the person they had. Written out of the picture. I didn't have to scream to be missed. All I had to do was vanish. A month after I left, I heard from a neighbor, a kind woman who used to leave garden bulbs on my porch she emailed me. Said my daughter had come by looking confused, concerned. She said you didn't tell them you were moving. The neighbor wrote, she looked unsettled. Good, let them sit with that. 2 months in, the calls came to the lawyer's office. Not angry, tentative, my son left a message, we're just trying to understand what happened. Please call us back. I didn't, because for years, I had tried to be understood. I had offered every soft answer, every forgiving smile, every second chance, and they had not heard me, not really, not until the cottage was gone, and the comfort had left with it. 3 months later, I got a letter, handwritten, from my daughter. The envelope was thicker than it needed to be. Inside was a long note. Apologies, mostly confused ones. We didn't know you felt that way. We never meant to hurt you. We were just trying to help. And that phrase again, you're not alone. No, I wasn't alone. But I was no longer theirs either. I didn't write back that summer. I heard from a former friend. Of theirs, a woman I used to see at school events, back when I was still called Mrs. Elgin with affection. She bumped into them at the farmer's market and later sent me a message, I think your absence is hitting them. I believed it because absence is not the opposite of love. It's the shape love leaves behind when it goes ignored. Without me, they started to unravel in small, quiet ways. The birthdays came and went without homemade cakes. Their children noticed. One of the grandkids, the eldest, reached out through an old email I hadn't closed. I miss your stories. She wrote, the ones you used to tell at sleepovers. Where did you go? I didn't answer, but I printed it, folded it into my notebook. A soft ache, but not an invitation, around the holidays. They posted photos without me, posed smiles, curated decorations, store-bought pies. I could see the absence in the corners, a chair left empty, a dish they tried to replicate but got wrong, the kind of wrong only a mother would notice. A mutual friend once told me my son had tried to find the bread recipe I used to make, the one with the orange zest and clove. It never rose right. He'd said, she must have had a trick. No, son, I just had patience. Without me, they started leaning on each other. And for a while, that was good, maybe even necessary. But then the cracks showed. My daughter called my old church, asking about my whereabouts. She spoke to the secretary, who kindly told her she didn't have permission to share that information. She thanked her, then cried. The secretary told me later. She was gentle about it. She sounded like she didn't know how to feel. She said. I nodded. Neither did I. They were learning now, slowly, what happens when you remove the foundation you forgot you were standing on, the missed pickups, the confusion over holidays. The endless calendar adjustments, the void where my planning, remembering, and steadying used to be, and maybe, just maybe, they began to understand something else, to that love is not just affection or blood or photo albums, it's constancy, it's presence. It's the act of showing up, again and again, even when no one thanks you. I watch them stumble, not with malice, not with joy, but with a kind of distant sorrow, like watching someone learn how to walk after taking your hands for granted too long. I wasn't punishing them, I wasn't seeking revenge, but there are lessons in absence that presence cannot teach. They had grown used to me being permanent, like the walls of a house, and when the house sold. When the door shut for the last time without warning or farewell, they found themselves standing in an empty space, and they did not know how to fill it. I began to feel lighter, not vindicated, just unburdened. My silence wasn't emptiness, it was space reclaimed. My days were filled with small joys now, a garden that didn't need to impress anyone, a kitchen where I cooked only for myself. Books stacked on the table in no particular order, a new pair of shoes I bought without asking if the money should go to someone else. I was no longer needed, and I was finally allowed to need nothing. Let them learn how to manage their own calendars. Let them pack their own pies, find their own heirlooms, tell their children their own bedtime stories. Let them learn what I had made look too easy, because what they lost without me wasn't just a person, it was the invisible glue of their lives, and glue, once gone, doesn't announce its absence. It simply stops holding things together. It took me almost a year to write the letter, not because I didn't know what to say. I knew, even then. The words had been living in me for years, layered and waiting, like silt at the bottom of a still lake, but I didn't want to write from anger, not from pain. I wanted it to come from the version of me they had forgotten existed, the one who once taught them how to tie their shoes, who whispered lullabies into their hair, who held them through the long, feverish nights of their childhoods. I wanted it to come from her, and she doesn't yell, she writes. The letter wasn't to them, not exactly. It was to me, to the woman I had once been, and the one I had finally found again. I sat down on a Tuesday morning, long after the fog had lifted from the fields, and wrote in the same notebook where I'd collected my silence. It started like this: I forgive you for needing more than they could give. I didn't know I was going to write that until it landed on the page, but once it did, everything else followed like breath. I wrote about the ways I had twisted myself to fit inside their version of motherhood, how I shrank my needs, trimmed my edges, polished my disappointments until they gleamed like good manners, how I confused selflessness with worth. I wrote about the day Thomas died, how even in my grief, I put on a pot of tea and made sure there were clean sheets for the guests who never came. I wrote about the nights I sat by the window, waiting for headlights that never turned into the drive, and I wrote about the moment in the linen closet on my 69th birthday when I realized I had become background noise in the house I built, but the heart of the letter was not memory. It was reclamation. I told myself what no one else ever had: you mattered, even when they didn't notice. You gave, even when they stopped receiving. You were never disposable. You were never a burden. It wasn't a dramatic letter. It didn't drip with regret. It was quiet. Like everything I had done in my life, steady, thoughtful, measured. I Wrote about the garden, about how the rosemary had bloomed late this year, about how I'd learned to wake with the sun instead of an alarm set by other people's needs. I wrote about a woman at the market who complimented my scarf and didn't ask if my children bought it for me. I wrote about the slow undoing of obligation, how good it felt to do something for myself without narrating it to others. I told myself that it was okay to miss them sometimes. That love doesn't need to be present to be real, that I could mourn what never was and still be whole. And then, toward the end, I wrote the only line that made my hand tremble: "You can let go now, you did enough." Because that's what no one ever tells mothers, that there is a stopping point, that the river of giving does not need to run forever, that it is not betrayal to stop pouring when the cup has long since been turned upside down. On my 69th birthday, my granddaughter asked if the cake was sugar-free, and my son said, "We'll just have to make sure she's still lucid enough to remember she had some." He laughed. And so did she, the kind of laugh that comes from familiarity, not cruelty, but comfort in your shared understanding that someone else is slowly fading. Except I wasn't. I was right there, holding the knife to cut the cake, hearing every word. "I'm Ruth Elgin, I'm 69. And that was the moment I knew my children had quietly erased me from the story I wrote for them. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks, the cake was lemon. My favorite, but made with one of those chalky substitutes, because my daughter thinks sugar is a poison and somehow assumed I'd die. Cy did the same. It sat awkwardly between us, candles melting quicker than usual because someone had cracked the window. I remember watching the wax spill and how no one noticed. They were too busy in the other room, sipping the wine I brought, a small thing. I know, but birthdays used to feel like gatherings. This one felt like a formality. I had dressed up, a soft green cardigan with pearl buttons. The one Thomas, my late husband, once said brought out the Irish in my eyes, though I'm not Irish. I wore earrings, put on lipstick, baked a second quiche, just in case the vegan one didn't set, and still, I'd been treated like an obligation, a woman they'd decided to outgrow. The part that stayed with me wasn't the sugar-free cake or the whisper about my memory. It was what happened in the hallway. They thought I'd gone to the restroom, but I'd stepped into the linen closet to check for more napkins. The walls are thin in the cottage, always have been, and I heard my son's voice. "She can't live there alone much longer. We'll have to start looking." And my daughter-in-law replied, in that dry little hum of hers, "She won't. Make it easy. But there's no way I'm dragging the kids out there every weekend. That house gives me asthma." They laughed, like it was nothing. Like the home Thomas and I built, beam by beam, was some crumbling artifact to be disposed of. I stood there, fingers still dusty from quiche crumbs, and knew not suspected that I was no longer seen as someone with a say. There is a very particular kind of loneliness that comes when your body is present, but your presence is not. I had not planned for this. I'd been practical, generous, loving, I thought, but apparently I had become someone to manage, so I took the napkins, smiled, served the quiche, pretended not to notice how they all started clearing the table before I'd finished my second bite. I looked around the room, the lace curtains I'd hemmed by hand, the antique plates from my mother, the bookshelf where I once taught my granddaughter to read, and saw nothing familiar in their eyes. Only a chore they were preparing to complete. And that's when the silence in me began. Not anger, not sorrow, exactly. Just a turning inward. They laughed about putting me in a home, so I sold the cottage 3 weeks later. Without telling them, cash offer, quiet listing. The man who bought it said he'd never seen such a well-kept home. I smiled and told him it was built on steadiness, on love. He asked why I was leaving. I told him to give someone else a chance to notice it. He didn't understand, and he didn't need to. When I handed over the keys, I didn't cry, I didn't even look back. The home had already been taken from me the moment they decided it was theirs to give away. What they hadn't counted on was that I still had one more say left. So I made it, and I walked away. No scene, no letter on the mantel, no confrontation, just absence, and the sound of that front door closing behind me softly, but permanently. They weren't born into money, not even comfort. I say that not with bitterness, but with the steady tone of someone who lived through decades of rain and mending roofs. When Thomas and I bought the cottage in '79, it was a shell, just beams, dust, and a long field that sloped toward the woods. No insulation. The front porch sagged like a tired old man. But we saw something in it, a place to raise children where their knees could be scraped in clean dirt, not concrete. Where they'd fall asleep to crickets, not sirens. We didn't have much, but I learned to stretch. I clipped coupons with care, kept a record book of every bill and grocery list. I made baby clothes from old flannel shirts, quilts from worn jeans. My fingers were always sore back then, but I didn't mind. There was purpose in every stitch. I was the kind of mother who knew which child would cry at thunderstorms and which needed their apples peeled. I remembered the way my son liked his socks folded, and how my daughter hated the sound of metal spoons against ceramic bowls. These aren't grand accomplishments, I know, but they were my quiet devotions. I stayed home when they were sick and even when they weren't, just to be nearby in case the world turned unkind. I taught myself how to cook without recipes, how to fill a lunchbox with comfort. I learned the math of motherhood, how to divide one meal into 5, how to subtract my own needs without resentment. And when Thomas got sick, I stayed up for nights in a row, nursing his fevers and whispering strength into the dark. He died quietly, with my hand in his, and the last thing he said was, "Don't let them take your softness." I didn't know what he meant, not then. Maybe he saw something coming that I didn't. After the funeral, I didn't collapse. I got up the next day and cleaned the gutters. I baked for the neighbors who came to sit in silence. I kept the house humming with the noise of normal life. Because grief doesn't make the beds or pay the electric bill. Over the years, I gave them things, not jewelry or stocks. We didn't have those, but things that mattered more than they realized. I babysat during job interviews and scraped together money for braces. Even when Thomas and I had to put off fixing the leaking bathroom pipe. When they called at midnight from dorm rooms, worried about failing exams or lost relationships, I stayed on the line. I listened when they didn't know they were being heard. I gave up vacations to help with down payments, sold the good china to cover one of their moving trucks. I never asked for anything back. It was always, of course, sweetheart, and don't even think about it. I remember one winter when the heater broke at my son's place. They had 2 toddlers at the time. I packed up blankets and a space heater, drove through ice, and slept on their couch just to help. That was the same year I skipped my mammogram, because I couldn't afford the copay after buying Christmas presents for everyone. I told myself I'd go in January. I didn't go until April. Sometimes I wonder if they remember those things. If they know how many hours I spent wrapping gifts in secret just so they'd believe Santa made it through a blizzard. Or how I used to iron their school uniforms at 4 a.m, so they'd never feel less than the other kids. There's no ledger for motherhood. No plaque for the nights you stay up sewing Halloween costumes or reheating dinner 3 times because someone was late. No one claps for you at the end. You just do it because love isn't loud, it's repetitive. And so I did the things no one sees. I noticed the scrape on my daughter's heel before she did. I washed the sheets after their friends had sleepovers. I made sure there were always batteries in the flashlight drawer. I replaced the smoke detector batteries without being asked. Every year on their birthdays, I made a point to call at the time they were born, 5:40 p.m. for my son, to 13 a.m. for my daughter, I would sit in the dark, phone pressed to my ear, and wait for them to pick up. When they did, I'd smile and say the same thing. Every year, the world changed at this hour, and I'm just so glad you're in it. They used to cry when I said that, then they started chuckling. Then one year, they stopped answering. It wasn't sudden. Nothing ever is. That's the cruel thing about time, it doesn't take anything all at once. It peels you down in layers, until one day, you realize the phone only rings for holidays. And even then, the call is short. I still sent them cards. Even when I knew they wouldn't write back, I still mailed packages to the kids, books I found at thrift stores, puzzles, cookies wrapped 3 times to stay fresh. Sometimes I imagined their faces opening the box, the way they used to light up when they were little. But you can only fill a room with love for so long before you notice no one walks through the door anymore. I gave them my youth, my strength, my quiet hours. I gave them my privacy, my comfort. My favorite side of the bed, I gave them the stories of my childhood, the secrets of my marriage, and the recipes my mother whispered to me in our kitchen in 1954. I gave and gave and gave. And then one day, I realized I had nothing left to give that they hadn't already taken. Still, I don't regret it, not one bit. That's the thing about love when it's real, it doesn't expire with neglect, it just reshapes. Itself folds. In Waits, what I didn't know, what I never saw coming, was how the slow forgetting would feel worse than a single moment of cruelty, how being needed was once my oxygen, and how silence, when it came, would feel like drowning in air. I signed the letter, not with love, not with sincerely, but with my full name, Ruth Elaine Elgin. As if saying it out loud might make it feel real again, I folded it slowly. Slipped it into an envelope I didn't seal, I didn't burn it. That would have been too final, too loud. Instead, I tucked it behind the mirror on my dresser, the same mirror where I once watched myself age without complaint. The same mirror that saw me soften for others and harden for myself. And I left it there, not as a secret, but as a reminder that I am still here, that I survived the slow forgetting. That I did not disappear, I withdrew, and there is a difference. A few days later, I received another letter in the mail, this one from my granddaughter, different handwriting than before, looser, messier, a teenager's script finding its way. It read, "I found your scarf in the closet. It still smells like rosemary. I miss you. Can we talk?" I held the paper for a long time. It smelled faintly of her vanilla lotion and something sweet, maybe strawberry lip balm. She hadn't written it for the woman they assumed was broken. She'd written it for the grandmother who used to braid her hair and whisper stories under the blanket fort. I didn't reply, not yet, not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted to answer her with my whole heart, not the fractured one they'd left behind. That night, I took out the letter to myself and reread it. I whispered the lines out loud, slowly, like scripture, like prayer. I touched the paper like it might vanish if I looked away. You can let go now. You did. Enough. And somehow, this time, I believed it. Something loosened in me then, not forgiveness that had already come, and not closure, because life doesn't tie itself up neatly. What loosened was expectation. The quiet ache of waiting to be seen, to be called, to be invited back into the center of a world that had already shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done being unfinished. That letter was not an ending. It was an opening, a door back to myself. After years spent knocking on someone else's, in the following weeks I began writing more letters, not to be sent, just to be said, to my husband, to my body. To the girl I once was in 1963, who thought love meant never saying I need something too. I wrote them all in that same notebook, filled it cover to cover, and when the last page was done, I closed it with both hands, held it to my chest, breathed in the stillness, then I tucked it away. Not to forget, but to remember that I had spoken, that I had not left the world without marking where I had been, with ink and truth, and finally, with my own name. Mornings come earlier now. I don't set alarms. I haven't in months. The light creeps in through sheer curtains. The kind with delicate stitching that I hemmed by hand last winter while listening to an old radio station that plays piano music and the occasional scratchy. Weather update, I wake before the world. Feels rushed, before texts if they come, and before the roads hum with engines. The kettle goes on first, always that same blue one, chipped on the handle. Now living in a kitchen that faces east and catches the sun in a golden hush across the floor. I sit with my tea in a chair that no one has claimed but me. It looks out over a small back garden not as big as the one at the cottage, but enough to grow rosemary, thyme, and a few tomatoes that will ripen late this year. I planted marigolds along the edge not for beauty, but for memory. Thomas once told me they kept pests away. I never questioned it, just believed him. I still do. Life is smaller now, in the best way. There are no calendars to manage, no grocery lists for others. No double-checking if someone likes oat milk, or if a child has outgrown a toy. My refrigerator holds only what I enjoy: cheese, apples, fig jam, a bottle of white wine that I uncork on Fridays, whether there's something to celebrate or not. I walk most days, not far, just enough to feel my feet remind me that I still belong here, that I am still carried. There's a trail behind the new place, lined with pines that drop their needles in silence. I stop sometimes to watch the birds, or to sit on the bench halfway down the slope, where the wind presses gently against the back of my neck like a blessing. There's a man who runs that trail, maybe mid-50s, always nods. We've never spoken, but we exchange the kind of smile you give to someone who understands how important it is to be left alone and seen. Both at once, the mailbox fills slowly, no longer with bills from places I didn't choose, or brochures for facilities I didn't ask for, mostly flyers now, a handwritten note once from a former neighbour who saw the for sale sign and wondered where I'd gone. I didn't answer, but I smiled. I go to the library twice a week. The librarian knows my name. She sets aside the kinds of books I like, the quiet ones, where people change not through plot twists, but through thought. She says I remind her of her grandmother. I take it as a compliment. Her voice is soft and sure, and her shoes squeak when she walks, which I find oddly comforting. Sometimes I volunteer, not out of guilt, just because it feels good to sit beside someone and fold paper, or count envelopes, or slice strawberries for a sea hurt gathering. No one asks me where my family is. They assume I'm simply someone with time and peace, and they're right. I do not watch their social media anymore, not because I'm angry, but because I no longer need to read a version of their lives that I'm not written into. I don't check birthdays. I don't anticipate calls. I've stopped waiting for holidays to become what they used to be. Instead, I mark the seasons by the trees. The birch outside my window began turning last week. A few yellow leaves, like gold coins left behind on the sidewalk. I'll collect a few, press them between the pages of a book I'm halfway through. Not to keep forever, just to notice. There's an art to quiet living. A rhythm. It doesn't announce itself. It settles in your bones. You learn to find meaning in the steam from your cup, in the sound of distant lawnmowers, in the warmth of socks just out of the dryer. My days are not exciting. They're not impressive. No one documents them, but they are full in the way a chest feels when you lie down after a long walk, when your lungs have worked and your heart has stayed steady, full in the way a pie crust crumbles just right, or how a candle smells when it burns low. Sometimes I sit in the evening and journal. Nothing profound, just lists. Today I watered the plants. Today I made soup with carrots that were nearly gone. Today I felt calm from start to end. I have no need for legacy anymore. Only presents. I still think of them, of course, my children. My grandchildren, they come to me in flashes. The way my son used to grip my pinky finger as a boy, the way my daughter's curls bounced when she ran through the sprinkler. I do not chase the memories away, but I do not cling to them either. They are not wounds now, just shadows, gentle ones, and I still love them. That never changed. But I love myself too, now. Enough to no longer beg to be held in their light. Enough to know that solitude is not punishment. It is permission to rest, to grow, to be without performing usefulness. The world does not ask much of me anymore, and I do not ask much of it, only that I may keep rising with the sun, that I may continue to move slowly and with care, that I may stay soft. Even after all I've lived through, I speak less than I. Used to, I listen more. I notice the pauses in conversation, how few people let them linger, how most rush to fill them, afraid of being misunderstood. I no longer fear silence, I trust it. In my bedroom, there is a single framed photograph. On the dresser, not of my children, not of my wedding day. It's a picture I took myself last spring, the garden in bloom, the lavender thick with bees. It reminds me of how full a life can be when no one's watching. I still write letters sometimes. Not to send, just to fold and keep, a habit, maybe. Or a ceremony. Last week, I wrote one final line in my notebook. Just one. It said, I wasn't angry. I was finally empty, and that was beautiful. It's been just over a year now. A full turn of the season since I left the cottage behind, sold the place that held their childhoods and mine, and stepped quietly into the chapter they never saw coming. I don't think about the logistics of it any more, the sale, the lawyer, the shock on their faces when they realized I had gone without permission. But sometimes, in the space between evening and nightfall, I think about the way they might picture me now. Do they wonder if I regret it? Do they imagine I'm sitting alone somewhere, pining for a knock at the door? Maybe they still think I'm angry, that I'm withholding myself to teach them something, that all it would take is one good apology and I'd return, arms open, apron tied, kitchen warm. But I've changed. Not out of revenge, not from resentment. Just like a river changes course not loudly, but permanently. If they come back, I won't be waiting. Not because I've stopped loving them, but because I've stopped abandoning myself. They lost the right to my tenderness the moment they packaged it like an inconvenience. Years ago, after Thomas passed, there had been a stack of documents from the lawyer. I trusted them, my children, to handle it. I had trusted that nothing would be done without my consent. Let alone my awareness, I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen, staring at the kettle. The little blue one with the chipped handle and the faint rust line inside the spout. It had outlasted my marriage, my youth, and now, apparently, my autonomy. There was no confrontation. No screaming. I didn't storm into their homes or demand apologies. That's not how I was raised. That's not who I am. Instead, I sat with it, the betrayal, not just of my trust, but of something deeper, something harder to name. The quiet knowing that somewhere along the line, I had become their burden, not their mother. That love had been replaced by liability. That they were preparing to move me like furniture gently, of course, and with good intentions, but without asking if I wanted to be moved. That weekend, my daughter came by. She brought lemon scones and a smile. Sat at my table like nothing had happened. Have you thought more about the brochure? She asked, not unkindly, not sharply, just casually. I asked her how long they'd been talking about it. She hesitated. A while, she admitted. Since last fall, we just think it's time to be realistic. You're getting older, and the cottage, well, it's a lot to keep up with. We worry about you out here, Mom. Alone, that word again, alone. As if it was a disease, as if I hadn't learned how to live inside silence without asking for anyone's cure. I looked at her, really looked, the face I once kissed clean after every playground spill, the eyes that used to search for me in every room, now looking through me, past me, toward a solution. A placement, a plan, a place where she wouldn't have to worry. That night, I opened the drawer where I kept the old legal papers. The power of attorney was there, tucked in a manila envelope with the fading ink of a law office that no longer existed. My son's name at the bottom, my signature above it shaky, but mine. I don't remember signing it, but I also don't remember anyone ever explaining what it really meant, that it gave him the right to act on my behalf, and that eventually they would. The next week, I got a call from a realtor, friendly, warm-voiced. Just following up on your inquiry about selling the property. I hadn't made one, but someone had. The line had been crossed, not with malice, but with comfort. The comfort of assuming I would not resist, that I would simply fold into the plan they had. Written for me, smile gently, move quietly. They underestimated the kind of strength that grows in silence. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse. I let them speak. I listened to the way they said words like transition, long-term plan, better quality of life. I nodded at every suggestion. And then I waited, because sometimes power doesn't come from reaction. It comes from stillness. I began writing things down, notes, copies. Letters to myself, a trail they would never expect me to follow. It wasn't just about the house, it was about the story. The idea that they could rewrite my ending without even reading the chapters that came before. They had taken my trust and folded it into paperwork, processed it, filed it away, and in doing so, they lost the only thing that mattered. Me, not the old woman in the garden, not the number on their checklist, not the future resident of Maplewood Assisted Living. Me, the mother who carried their fears in the lining of her coat. The woman who stayed up through their colds, their heartbreaks, their late-night sobs. The one who held them through their beginnings. And now they had quietly written my end. That was the moment something inside me shifted. The line had been crossed. And I was not going to let them walk back over it. I stopped answering the phone. Not in protest, and not with spite. I just let it ring. It's strange how silence doesn't arrive all at once. It starts in the small decisions, not replying right away. Not filling the pauses in conversation, not reaching for comfort that won't come. And then, one day, the silence is simply there, not heavy, not angry. Just still. I sat with that stillness for weeks. I let it gather around me like steam from the kettle, curling into corners, filling the rooms they no longer entered. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even lonely. It felt like coming home to myself after years of being someplace else. I started keeping a small notebook on the kitchen counter, just a cheap one-lined, spiral-bound. The kind school children use for spelling lists. At first, I wrote reminders to myself, little things, check the fuse in the shed, rotate the mattress, call the bank. But after a few days, it changed. The pages became quieter, more personal. I wrote memories, observations. I wrote the date of the first time my son used my signature. Without asking. I wrote the date of the realtor call. I wrote the names of the facilities they had toured. I didn't know what I was gathering, only that I needed to gather it. There is a peculiar kind of strength in quietly collecting truth. It doesn't look like resistance. It looks like baking bread in the morning and folding laundry at dusk. While the truth sits folded neatly in your pocket, I consulted a lawyer, not the same one they had used, a woman downtown, recommended by the librarian whose mother she cared for alone. I told her everything. Not all at once, I'm not that kind of woman, but slowly, like pouring from a kettle you don't want to spill. She listened, nodded, and never looked surprised. She'd seen it before, When I showed her the power of attorney, she read it carefully. Her fingers moved with precision. She flipped through my notes. She asked if I wanted to challenge it. No, I said, I just want to understand what they believe they have. She explained the options, quietly, clearly. I left with a folder, a new will, and the knowledge that I still had rights they hadn't counted on me knowing. Back home, I trimmed the rosemary bush and repainted the porch rail. I did the kinds of things people don't expect you to do when they're planning your exit. I changed the locks. Not for protection, for peace. And I began to save. I've always been good with money. Frugal, as my husband used to say. I had no debts, no extravagant tastes. I started setting money aside, not in large amounts, but quietly, purposefully, every time they didn't visit. Every time they skipped calling, I tucked something away. The grocery money I would have spent on hosting, the gas I would have used to drive to their homes, it added up quickly. I opened a separate account, one they didn't know about. It's funny how quickly the world assumes that older women are helpless. Invisible. It can be painful, but it can also be useful. You learn to move unnoticed. You learn that silence is a cloak no one bothers to lift. They texted. Of course, they always did. Messages like "you okay, Mom," or just checking in. With exclamation marks as if energy could replace effort. I read them. I didn't reply. A part of me waited to see if they'd try harder. They didn't. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Eventually, the text slowed. One read, "We're giving you space. Let us know when you're ready to talk." Ready to talk. As if the silence belonged to me. As if they hadn't been feeding it for years, one missed birthday at a time. The neighbor's daughter came by during that time. She was maybe 25. New to the town, she brought me plums from the tree she was learning to tend. We sat on the back steps and talked about nothing. She didn't know my story. She didn't ask. But when she left, she said, "You have kind eyes." It was the first sincere thing anyone had said to me in months. That night, I cleaned out the attic. Not with sadness, but with intention. I found boxes of baby clothes, yellowed with time, school projects, letters from Thomas, written in the early years of our marriage. When he still worked long days in the factory and left notes under my pillow to make up for the silence. I burned nothing. I kept what mattered, but I let go of what no longer did. There is power in choosing what you carry. A week later, the county assessor came by. "Routine check," he said. He noticed the repairs I'd made to the front steps, said they looked good. "You keeping this place up better than most," he said. I nodded, smiled, said nothing, because they thought the place was falling apart, too much for me, unsafe. A relic of a life they had already moved past. They thought the roof leaked and the foundation cracked. They thought I was too fragile for upkeep, but they hadn't asked. I'd had the roof redone last spring, quietly, with the money from an old savings bond Thomas and I had tucked away in a biscuit tin. I hadn't told anyone, just scheduled it. Watched the men work from the garden while I trimmed the lavender back. The cottage wasn't failing. They just didn't come close enough to see it in my silence. I learned more about them than I ever did in conversation. I learned how quickly they replaced concern with assumption. I learned how they filled the gaps with plans of their own. I learned that, deep down, they believed my age was an expiration date. They forgot that aging is not decline, it's deepening. My voice hadn't weakened. It had only gone quiet so I could hear myself again. I watched the sun shift later into the day, each afternoon a little longer than the last. I watched the bees return to the thyme. I watched the world go on, with or without their check-ins. They say parents are supposed to let go. I did, but I never expected to be the one who was dropped that day in the hallway, with the birthday cake still on the table and their laughter echoing down the narrow walls. Something in me closed, not just the chapter, the whole book. It wasn't rage, just an end, like a candle flickering out, soft and certain. But endings are only painful when you believe there's more to come. I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, I had been wrong all along. Maybe the kind of love I gave wasn't the kind that gets remembered, or maybe they had simply grown used to it. Like the wallpaper in the hallway, always there, barely seen. Until one day it's peeled off without a thought. I didn't say anything then. I just took a breath, folded the napkins, and watched the room like a stranger watches a house they used to live in, and in that stillness, I began to understand that the silence I'd been feeling wasn't coming from them. It had been waiting inside me all along. There wasn't a single moment when they stopped needing me. It just faded like the way a summer evening becomes night, slow and hard to mark, until one day you look up and it's dark. After Tom has passed, I noticed it first in the silences, not the loud kind. Not the absence of voices, but the hollowness. After small things, I'd leave a message, just a quick one, let me know you got home safe, or I made too much soup, come by if you like, and the return call wouldn't come. Maybe a text, 2 days later, sorry, crazy week. It was always a crazy week. The soup cooled, then spoiled. The porch light stayed on, waiting for footsteps that never came. I used to think maybe it was me, maybe I was too needy, too involved, too eager, so I stopped calling, just for a few days, to see what happened. Nothing happened. No one noticed the quiet. No one knocked on the door or checked their voicemail. Days rolled into weeks, and when the phone did ring, it was for something else, school fundraiser. PTA confusion, scheduling a dentist. I was no longer a person, just a utility, something to be powered on when needed, powered off when not. Once, my granddaughter got sick at school. A fever, 102. They called me because my daughter was in a meeting and her husband was on a flight. I drove straight there, picked her up, wrapped her in my old quilt, and made a nest on my couch like I used to for her mother. She curled up, pale and sleepy, and I sat beside her all afternoon. No cartoons, just soft music and cool cloths on her forehead. She whispered, "Thanks, Grandma," before dozing off, and for a moment I felt needed again. But when her mother arrived to pick her up, she didn't come in, just texted from the driveway. I walked the child out wrapped in the same quilt and stood there, watching my daughter scroll her phone, not even looking up. "She doing better?" she said, not as a question, just a script. I nodded, she nodded back, and that was it. She never brought back the quilt. It's strange how the small things start to sting more than the big ones. You expect the distance after a funeral, after a move. You brace yourself for holidays spent alone. But you don't expect them to forget your birthday until 2 days after, or to cancel Sunday dinner because the kids have sports. You don't expect your name to be saved in their phone under Mom's cell like a utility number. Not Mama, not Mama, like they used to call me when they were little. You don't expect to sit in your living room and see a photo on social media of your family out to brunch the same Sunday you offer Ed to make waffles and no one answered. You don't expect to be replaced by convenience. It's not that they were cruel. I want to be fair. There were still hugs, still Mother's Day cards, though the handwriting wasn't theirs anymore. Printed, impersonal, store-bought sentiments. Sealed with guilt, they still asked how I was, sometimes, but not in the way that invites an answer. More like a traffic sign there and gone in the same breath. I started talking to myself more, not out of madness, but habit. I'd say things aloud like, "Don't forget the dryer," or "Turn off the porch light," just so a voice would live in the room. When I saw neighbors walking with their grown kids, laughing on the sidewalk, I stopped waving. I didn't want to feel the shame of them waving back and asking how my family was, knowing I wouldn't have much to say. One night I got dizzy while hanging laundry. Just a moment, a rush of blood to the head. I sat on the floor of the hallway until it passed. I thought about calling someone, just in case. But who would I call? My daughter would panic. My son would suggest the emergency room and say, "You shouldn't be living out there alone." So I didn't call. I waited. And the next day, I mopped the hallway like nothing happened. The hurts weren't loud. They were as soft as forgotten anniversaries, birthdays left to chance. The sound of one chair being pulled out instead of two. There was the time I mailed my grandson a birthday gift, a wooden puzzle I'd spent weeks restoring from an old flea market find. I sanded each piece, hand-painted it, varnished it with care. When I asked weeks later if he liked it, my daughter said, "Oh, I don't think it ever got here. I never saw it again." There was the Christmas when they all chipped in to buy me a smart speaker, even though I'd never asked for one. I smiled, said thank you, and wrapped the cord around it that night. Putting it back in the box, it still sits in the hall closet, next to the unopened exercise bands they gave me the year before. I used to be asked to bring the pies, now they order from the store. I used to be asked how I was feeling. Now they tell me what supplements to take. I used to be known. Now I'm managed. It's a terrible thing to feel like a guest in your own bloodline. I kept trying. For a while, I invited them for tea, sent clippings from the garden, even offered to teach the kids how to bake bread like I used to with their parents. But they always had somewhere to be. Soccer, work, errands, always a reason why next time made more sense. There's always a next time, until there isn't. So I started watering the garden more than it needed, talking to the basil plants, like they were company, reading out loud to the radio, leaving the porch light on less and less. I began to feel invisible in a home built with my hands. Like a ghost wandering rooms that once held noise, now filled only with memory. Somewhere along the way, the 100 quiet hurts became a wall, not a high one, not sudden, just stone by stone, moment by moment, and the thing about walls is eventually, you realize no one's on the other side trying to climb in. They've built one too. That's when I stopped trying to knock, because the worst kind of abandonment isn't loud. It's being slowly taught that your presence is optional, and one day, when I looked around and saw all the rooms still tidy, all the dishes clean, all the silence unbroken, I understood something I never wanted to. I was not waiting to be remembered. I was learning to forget. It had been a dry summer the year they crossed the line, the kind where everything feels brittle grass, tempers, even memories. I'd been keeping to myself more by then. The garden still needed tending, and I still baked on Thursdays, but most of my days were stitched together in quiet rituals, a slow cup of tea at sunrise, a walk down to the mail slot. Even when I knew nothing was coming, dusting the picture frames as if the people inside might feel it, I had almost convinced myself that the distance between us was survivable, that if I lowered my expectations down far enough, I wouldn't feel the sting, that all I needed was peace. But peace is not the same thing as absence. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that they were already making plans without me. It started with a letter, not a handwritten one, but a formal envelope with pre-printed ink and the kind of paper that creases to perfectly. At first, I thought it was a clerical error, a misaddressed document, but my name was there, spelled correctly, my address, the county seal at the top, a notice of review. Application for elder care benefits. I read it 3 times, each slower than the last. There, in black and white, was an application for placement assistance, initiated by a third party unnamed in the first notice. But familiar all the same. I placed it on the kitchen table beside my tea. The air in the room suddenly felt thick. I opened a window. For a full day, I didn't call anyone. I didn't ask questions. I just waited for the truth to come walking through the door. But it never did. A week later, I received another letter. This one from a local elder care facility, a pamphlet, a kind welcome. We look forward to meeting you. Ruth, my stomach turned. That was when I asked. My son didn't hesitate. Oh yeah. We looked into a few places, just in case, you. No, for down the line. Nothing to worry about down the line. Like I was a shipment being scheduled. A task moved to the next quarter. When I asked how they'd gotten my information, he said something I'll never forget. Not because it was cruel, but because it was so calm, we had to sign a few forms. To get the process going, just preliminary stuff. The power of attorney helps. You signed it a while ago. Remember, I did not, but I knew, deep down, that I probably had. The moment they mistook my generosity for weakness, the moment they decided I was safer managed than heard, that kind of forgetting doesn't come undone with time. They may visit someday. They might find the address, hear about the little town, where the quiet woman with the kind smile lives in a rental with marigolds by the fence. They might bring flowers, or grandkids in the back seat, eager and wide-eyed. They might say all the right things, finally. They might mean them. But I won't return to the role they kept me in for so long, the one where I ask for nothing and give everything. I will not step back into their convenience. They'd find a woman who no longer shapes herself to fit their schedule, who no longer changes her tone to keep the peace, who no longer waits beside the phone hoping to be remembered on days she carried in her body like holy offerings. They'd find someone quieter, yes, but stronger. And that strength would be unfamiliar to them. Not because it wasn't always there, but because they never cared to look for it. They only saw the apron, not the spine beneath it. I think that's what happens. Sometimes with mothers, we become part of the scenery, the wallpaper behind their lives. So woven into the fabric of their comfort that they stop seeing us as people at all. Only after we go missing does the room feel cold. I have no bitterness left. Bitterness is a fire, and I've already burned what needed burning. What's left is clarity, a soft, steel sort of knowing. I've stopped romanticizing repair. I no longer believe that closure needs to come from anyone else. Sometimes the apology doesn't come. Sometimes the understanding never arrives in the mailbox. Sometimes people don't return changed, they return hoping you haven't. And I have. I have changed. I no longer carry their birthdays like sacred reminders on my calendar. I don't bake extra loaves just in case. I don't refresh my inbox at holidays. I plant what I can eat. I cook for one. I answer only when I want to. And I no longer mistake guilt for love. If they come back, I will offer tea, perhaps, but not explanations, not reassurances, not access, because I am not something to be forgiven for leaving. I am someone they failed to hold when it mattered, and that is not undone by regret. There's a kind of mourning that comes after peace, a soft ache, not because I want what was, but because I finally see it for what it was, the version of me they depended on no longer exists. She was brave, she was kind, she was quiet for too long, she deserved better. I live in a place now where my name is not Mom or Grandma or Are you busy? It's Ruth, just Ruth. I'm getting used to saying it again with full breath. I've made new friends, quiet ones like me. We gather once a week to knit or read or walk. We don't talk much about our families. Some things don't need words. We carry the same echoes in our bones. There's a widow named Carol who brings tea in a thermos with chipped enamel. We sit under the pergola near the park and listen to wind through the grass. We talk about nothing and everything. We laugh without explanation. I didn't know how much I needed that. I journal less these days, not because there's nothing to say, but because I've said it. The silence is not a void anymore. It's a room I've built for myself. A sanctuary where I'm not interrupted, redirected, or asked to justify how I feel. Sometimes I pass by families on the sidewalk, a mother holding a child's hand, a teenager rolling their eyes. I don't ache, I don't envy. I simply nod to the rhythm of it all, the passage of care, the ebb of closeness. Some things are seasons, and not all of them are meant to return. I gave them everything, and now I give myself the rest. They may never understand what they lost. They may never learn how hard I worked to keep the ground beneath their feet steady. They may never tell their children about the woman who once kissed every skinned knee and swallowed her opinions whole. But I remember, and sometimes memory is enough. This new life is not glamorous, it's not loud, but it is full of breath, and time, and space. I rise when I want. I sleep without a phone beside the bed. I eat slowly. I laugh without fearing interruption, and if the doorbell rings, I do not jump. I choose whether to answer, because finally I live in a world where my presence is not taken for granted. If they come back, they will find the door unlocked, yes, but not wide open. They'll find a woman sitting in a room filled with morning light, a pot of tea on the stove, and a heart no longer waiting to be chosen. And if they ask me why I left, I'll tell them gently, I didn't leave you. I returned to myself.